Good afternoon, and thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate all of today's participants. I'd like to welcome you to our first CPG Speak session of 2021, produced in partnership with Snack International. A big thank you to Elizabeth Avery and the team at Snack for supporting today's event. This series allows our industry to come together, to learn important lessons from company leaders, and to think differently about their own businesses. This year, we're featuring monthly sessions with C-suite leaders discussing topics that everyone in our industry faces. Stay tuned for more information at the end of today's session for the CEOs that will join us in April. Today, I'm pleased to be joined by Mark Clouse, President and CEO of Campbell Soup Company. Mark was named to this role in 2019, making him the 14th leader in the company's 150-year history. So if you do the math, it's apparent that CEOs at Campbell stick around for a while. That's good news for Mark. Today, Mark and I will dive into three topics. First, how Campbell is building and maintaining trust in their business. Second, how inclusion and diversity are integrated in their business and why the company speaks about the effort in that order. And finally, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on business and what that looks like 1 year later. Mark, thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Jeff. Looking forward to it. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. You came to this role perhaps a little bit of a different path than is typical for business leaders. Before embarking on this CPG career, you attended West Point. You served as a captain in the U.S. Army. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your background, what shaped you, and how you think that positioned you well for what you're doing today.
Yeah, so needless to say, I wish I could tell you that I'd had this master plan all mapped out, but the reality was that as I went through the experience at West Point and left school, was an Army officer and a pilot, helicopter pilot for 6 years. I thought about what to do next and looked at a variety of different occupations, and I was lucky that some really talented prior military officers were in CPG, and several of the bigger companies had programs where they afforded the opportunity for someone coming out of the military, kind of with the idea that you'll bring a little bit of the leadership and project management, and they'll teach you the business side. Was really the pathway, and I started at Kraft Foods. Now almost, I guess, 25 years. Roughly, and it's been a great journey. And I started with some other familiar faces within our industry. Andy Callahan, sadly a Navy guy, but he was with me at Kraft in those early days when the military officer program was part of a pipeline of diverse talent into Kraft Foods, and it also existed at P&G and some other places as well. So that's how I got started. And I will say that as perhaps, you might not intuitively get, but there's quite a bit of parallel between a lot of the work that's done in my time as a military officer and many of the things that we face as an industry and as leaders within the organizations that we're all in. And so I have found a nice parallel of things I was learning then that I probably didn't realize I was learning, that have been very applicable, especially as we've gone through this last year of pandemic and crisis, which has obviously been a new and a somewhat unique leadership challenge for many of us.
Well, one of the things you must have picked up on, particularly if you were a helicopter pilot, is being fearless, I guess. So you run into a pandemic, you're not, I assume you weren't cowed by that.
Well, I think we were all humbled by it, Jeff, honestly. I think many of us probably went through a lot of education and learning through the journey. I mean, I'm not sure there was a playbook handy and ready for some of the things that we've navigated over the last 12 months. But I will say that there were some foundational or fundamental things about leading in the military that were helpful experiences to draw upon. And perhaps the most salient was this idea of focus, and really in a moment of crisis, setting as clear, as consistent, as simple of a message and mission for the organization. And very much so at Campbell's over these last 12 months, we've had a pretty simple agenda where we really anchored on three things. First and foremost, keeping our colleagues safe, around the organization, from our tremendous frontline workers that I couldn't be more proud and grateful for, that have been out there throughout this whole process, to folks that were delivering and connecting with retailers and customers to keep the flow of product. That was number one, first and foremost. Number two was really maximizing our capacity. I do think for the entire industry, beyond just the normal day-to-day need that we fulfill, it was a moment where we were really called upon in a variety of different ways. And I think, for myself and Campbell's, but also for my peers across other companies, really proud of how the industry stepped up and ensured that we had product available, perhaps not always as much as our customers or consumers would want, but that was really the second priority. And then the third was to start to really think about implications going forward, and how do you begin to stay a step ahead of what's coming next. And essentially, those three things became the brief. And I will say that's a page right out of kind of the military training and development on keeping things very simple and focused, especially in moments of chaos. And I think it served us well. I'm proud of the performance of Campbell's, and certainly always things that we learned along the way, but a lot of things that we can look back on and be proud of.
We were going to get the COVID third in our list, but we're already here. So let's just dive into COVID. On a recent call, you noted that you're seeing continued increases in sales and household penetration across categories and demographic groups, driven in part by obviously increased eating at home. But you were seeing growth before the pandemic.
Yeah.
That said, many have referred to Campbell's as the poster child for the type of product that was rediscovered during the pandemic. What was that experience? And the question everybody's asking, how do you retain the customers that might have discovered the business?
Sure. Yeah, I think that is a lot of the big question. I would say, though, part of what's somewhat a little bit unique about Campbell is that 50% of our business is a snacking business. And as you've followed along on the trends of snacking, those businesses were growing well before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and I'm fairly certain will continue to grow at a very steady pace after. And so, I do think that provides a nice, if you will, foothold of confidence and sustainment of growth, even beyond the effects of COVID and the increase in household penetration. But we do have a very important other half of our business, which is our meals and beverage business. And, these are iconic kind of fabric of the nation brands like Campbell's or Swanson or Prego, Pace, even V8. And there's no question that in a very challenging moment and difficult time of the pandemic, the relevancy of our businesses have really been accelerated. And I think, to your point, this was part of what the strategy for the company was before the pandemic began, as we kind of refocused our portfolio, one geography, two divisions, 13 categories. That focus was, I think, a powerful move for us, but it also put a lot more dependence on our ability to turn around some of these businesses that had not been performing great. And so, we were on the case, and I'm very grateful that we had the year before the pandemic to do some of the things we did on quality, to kind of strengthen some of our fundamentals, make some investments in our businesses and our brands, so that as we walked into the pandemic and you have this infusion of millions of new households that are consuming our products, we at least were not starting completely on our heels. And I think that was a huge benefit for us to be able to navigate through this period. I think as you kind of come out of the period, I think the key to this is going to be, how do you maintain that relevancy, even as we all are anxious to see life come back to some level of normality? How do you continue to maintain that relevancy? And I think, the good news for us is that I believe there are things that are very macro in nature, like the behavior of cooking, which is really exploded in many ways. A whole new generation of cooks are out there, and although it may have begun out of necessity, it's really been a positive experience. And when you hear consumers talk about it, it's really become part of their lifestyle, and we certainly would expect that to continue in one capacity or another. I think the other big area of macro trends that have been important for us has been the in-home lunch occasion, where so many of our products play an important role, and even snacking, where we know that about a third of in-home lunches are accompanied by one of a snack product of some type. That gives us I think, and as companies talk about their return to work model and whatever you may peg as what that will look like, I think the idea of more in-home, virtual work or lunches that are occurring are going to be part, of the landscape going forward. And so I think those are two very significant macro trends that we believe shape the belief that the retention of some level of these households is quite possible. And then I think the second area is we've spent a lot of time trying to understand with consumers, what have they liked, what haven't they liked specific to our brands. And the good news is there's a lot of positive there to build on. But perhaps one of the things we did that was somewhat unique is we really went out and asked consumers essentially, why wouldn't you continue to use us? Like, what is it that, is either not fulfilling your needs, or that you would see as a gap in our current portfolio? And that's really been powerful in guiding our thinking as it relates to both marketing and innovation. And I think our ability to action on those insights will also be important, and bringing that together in the context of how do you really kind of keep your pedal on the gas, if you will, on connecting, communicating, and continuing to build equity and relevance is going to be the name of the game. And even in a world where we could haggle for the next hour over how many households and what percent, but I think it's really hard to make the case that we're not at minimum coming through this very difficult time in a stronger, more relevant position.
Any aspects of the portfolio that struggle in this environment or the foreseeable future?
Yeah, I mean, there were definitely parts of the business where if your primary occasion of usage was away from home, it was a tougher time. And so, interestingly enough, I think some of the learnings that we, got through this experience were probably some things we didn't really know. I mean, one of the most dramatic, I think, for us was goldfish, and the dynamic of just how much of that occasion of goldfish happens away from home, whether it's in a school lunch or whether it's in the minivan with mom and the kids on their way to whatever. We saw what I would say was more pressure than we expected. And again, I think what we've tried to do from that is pivot to better position goldfish for the occasion of in-home. And I think at the end of this, the ability for us to both, be relevant away and in home is going to strengthen the brand, and our ability to really, like I said, kind of build the relevance, but also, a more competitive position, different pack sizes, a variety of things that have come out of this period that I think is going to help us for the future.
I would never have thought of car wash vacuum cleaners as someone that struggled with COVID, but if there were fewer goldfish in the car, we can also do that.
Yeah, I mean, what are you vacuuming? I mean, you're not going anywhere. But no, it was interesting. I mean, it's such a powerful brand, and so kind of uniquely positioned in this better for you cracker and kids space. But we had to broaden our horizon, and I think it's going to make us stronger as a brand down the road, having lived through this.
Another big part, you mentioned two ways the consumer changed. Another way they changed some of their buying habits online. Obviously, the digital shift here was significant. Can you talk a little bit about how you guys have adapted to that? What's worked, perhaps what hasn't?
Well, that's another one of those that I would put into the category of a trend that was happening that was just kind of jumped forward. And, however you qualify that leap, it was significant. And I think, what we've been doing is really trying to adapt to that relative to how we invest, how our portfolio is shaped. I will say, one of the things that we've been very, very focused on is the differences within e-commerce. What's the unique solution for an online retailer versus a third-party shopper, to what we've been most successful with, which is click and collect, or our retail partners platforms, which obviously has some very attractive elements about it, as the inventory that is such a difficult nut to crack within the world of e-commerce. In click and collect, you're really working through the inventory in the store, so your assortment. And although I think we're learning some things, one of the more interesting elements that we've spent a lot of time on is the expansion of our bundle pack range on Soup, because the behavior on online, click and collect or direct to consumer, is much more in multiples. It makes shelving the product easier. It really supports both the retailer's needs as well as the consumer needs. And those are the kind of win-win ideas that we're really trying to mine out of this period. And, we've done well. I mean, I think this is one of those ones where it's a continuous learning curve, but, we now have over 2/3 of our spending and marketing that's happening in the digital space. And a lot of that is lining up with these, whether it's customer centric or media platforms that exist in these online spaces, which I think more and more is going to be an important part of your media planning and your marketing planning, and those lines between what are customer and retail and what's marketing continue to get very blurry. And so, we've learned a lot in the last 12 months, and I'm happy that even at times where we might have been a little pressured on supply, we kind of continued to invest into the curve, one, to support the brands, but two, to also gain a lot of learnings. And so now as we start to think about, what's next, our ability to be more surgical or more precise in what's working or what worked the best to build our media plans going forward has been a very important benefit that's come out of this window or period.
Last question for you on COVID related stuff. Once heard a speaker say that sacred cows make the best hamburgers. When you look at some of the rituals and some of what may have been sacred within Campbell, did COVID force you to get out of that? And can you give an example of something where you're just going in a new direction?
Yeah, honestly, well, certainly, I think the learning around Goldfish and the expansion of Goldfish to a more all-family platform, and the recognition of how relevant it can be in a variety of different occasions is a great example of expanding our horizons. I think, honestly, Jeff, not dodging the question, but, one of the things that I think, has been very, very helpful for us is several of the paradigms we were trying to change or that we were pushing on, in fact, have been kind of empowered by the experience of COVID. So, we were met with a lot of skepticism, I think, when we talked about things like quick scratch cooking, how we were going to get more consumers cooking, or the idea that soup is not necessarily a category that the world has passed by, but yet it's this unique combination of nutritional density and emotional fulfillment that was, again, elevated or accelerated through this period. I think a lot of the things we were trying to change were in many ways helped by a very difficult and challenging moment, but one that really, pulled forward some of the efforts that we had. So, there's certainly a lot of other things we've learned along the way, how to work and, how do you live in a virtual environment, that I think will have some lasting impact for us as a company. But I think on the consumer side, honestly, it kind of, nudged forward where we were trying to go strategically.
So let me switch topics. Before I do that, let me remind people that we look forward to getting to a Q&A at the end. So please submit some questions through the Q&A function here in Zoom, and we'll make sure to get to those. I mentioned at the outset inclusion and diversity. A little bit different way of how many order that, but it was also an issue throughout the COVID year that became front and center across the industry, across America, a massive area of focus. For Campbell's in particular, a lot of credit for what you guys have done, ranking high on Bloomberg's Gender Equity Index. This is obviously a priority in the company. Can you talk a little bit about your approach to it? Talk a little bit about, and you and I have had this conversation, inclusion and diversity, why you put it in that order, how you think about these issues.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think I would just start by saying that I would imagine for many that are on the call today, we've talked a lot about the educational journey of the last 12 months. But this is definitely an area for me, personal development and education. I probably have learned more and gotten a better education over these last 12 months than in many, many years behind it. And, I think, quite frankly, if someone would have asked me, 12 months ago, 18 months ago, where do you stand on diversity? How would you categorize your efforts in this space? I would have said, absolutely. I'm all in. I'm leading. I'm, setting the right examples. I'm committed. All of the right language. But I got to be honest. As I've gone through this year and really reflected on the lasting impact that I've had, or that the amount of let's call it more legacy impact that I've been able to facilitate and help lead. I don't think it was enough. I don't think it was what I perceived it to be, and I think it created a catalyst for rethinking quite a few things that I think have been held as kind of perhaps realities that were not really grounded in facts. And one of the things you talked about, and I get it's a bit of subtlety in language, but we start with inclusion because what we really believe is if you're going to have a systemic impact, you have to have systemic plans. And not unlike you would tackle any other transformational initiative in your company, I believe if you don't wire the same kind of approach to what we're trying to accomplish in this area, that you're probably going to get a lot of the same results we've gotten historically. And so the idea of inclusion coming first is really about wiring comprehensively a broad scope plan and strategy that will change culture, that makes it conducive to attracting and retaining diversity. I think sometimes we've come through this in the lens of diversity, right? Setting, targets or simply, kind of broad statements. And what we've tried to do differently this time is, as I said, create really a systemic and structured strategy that if you were to compare it to some of our big strategic plans on the business, it would look exactly the same. I have my leadership team. Every member on it owns one of those strategies and initiatives. We've brought in a wonderful leader in Camille Pierce, who by design, again, we call her the Chief Culture Officer, to separate a little bit from some of the prior efforts that weren't quite as effective. She's a member of my leadership team. She's there for annual planning review, monthly forecasting, and really what we're doing is embedding it in all of the foundational processes of the company. So it's not about setting targets, it's about ensuring that our processes are level playing fields, that the transparency of how we hire or promote or plan succession or even how we run the business. One of the things that we found is sometimes the kind of unwritten processes or just the tribal knowledge of how you get things done in a company can really be a barrier to inclusiveness. And so how do we make or demystify some of those standard business processes so that if you're a new member of our organization, regardless of ethnicity or background, that you've got an understanding and access to the things that are going to help you be successful and be the best version and the fullest potential that you can be. And that'll sound a little bit cliche, but that's, I think, really the way that we're going to improve. And I think we're in a moment, and again, I realize a little bit of a long answer, but needless to say, a lot of passion here. I've also had to unlearn. I think what's been 20 years of, let's call it, corporate executive training on how to kind of keep at arm's length social issues and where we stand on certain things. And I do think there's a very important distinction between politics and social issues and social justice. But and I still think, the politics is where you draw the line. But as it relates to social issue, our employees want to know where we stand on these things. And the idea that corporations can sit on the sidelines, I just don't think is the day we're in. And by the way, I think that's a good thing. It's also great to see investors starting to ask me those questions.
Yeah.
And again, I think it's, it is going to require that same kind of, as my dad would say to me, kind of that pick and shovel work to really ensure that it's embedded and integrated. And so probably a little longer answer to your question, but I think a really interesting topic to talk about, and certainly not one that I've got all the right answers for, but we're going to try to do it differently. And I hope that we end up with some very different outcomes.
Well, I think your passion comes shining through, and I think your transparency is something that, both good and bad, right? Your willingness to acknowledge what you don't know is something that I'm sure is welcome today, but also by your own team as well. You mentioned Camille, your own team brought her in to be Chief Culture Officer. What are the metrics for success in that role?
Yeah, so we have it's 12 strategies, and we've framed up this whole initiative in 3 pillars, which is anchored in education, advocacy, and then accountability, right? So again, not unlike other things that you're going to accomplish in the business, we've got metrics, and I'm not talking quotas, right? I'm not talking those kinds of targets, but I have outcomes related to the actions that are placed on a time continuum. So those KPIs become what we review. And as a leadership team, we dedicate a significant amount of time in our monthly cadence and rhythm to ensuring that for each of my leadership team members that own a particular initiative, they know what those goals and metrics are. We have those in their annual goals. I'm doing mid-year reviews right now because we're, midway point of our fiscal year, and we're talking about those. Are you doing enough? All right, you're in charge of, our transparency and availability of metrics in the company. Are they where they need to be? Are we, where we need to be? You're the sponsor of our employee resource group. Have we accomplished the goals we set there? And so everybody's got very clear goals for what they need to deliver in this area. And we measure the heck out of it, right? We've got a scorecard, and we share that scorecard with the entire organization at each of our quarterly town halls. So, again, there's a lot of people in our company that have seen efforts in this area, and quite frankly, have not always, have been a bit disappointed at times. And so, part of what we're building, I think, here too, is credibility and transparency, which is at the heart of so many of the efforts around inclusion anyway. So, they do work together well, but that's the way we're really driving accountability.
You mentioned the power of the workforce and your employees demanding certain information. Prior to this, you led Pinnacle Foods. You've had other leadership positions. You go back to Kraft Heinz 25 years ago. How has the power of the employee shifted over the course of your career? I assume you would say the employee is more powerful today than they've ever been before. Why is that?
Well, I think it's partly because it's how so many of our employees in the company are inspired and motivated to come to work. They're seeking a purpose. Not to say, and having been coming up through that period of time 25 years ago, I'd like to think I had some purpose in what we were doing as well. But I think the combination of kind of the generational movement and this sense of ownership of a broader purpose in life, and having that be an important part of how you make choices on your career, or where you're going to work, or who you're going to work for, while also having a communication environment that's empowered by a social media foundation that really enables a dialogue and conversation in different ways, I think has really opened up the confidence to ask those questions. And I think it is a journey, and we continue to try to learn from it. I have to tell you, and I'm sure many of my colleagues, as many out there that I talked to during this window, but when we were navigating the tragedy of George Floyd, many of us were looking for, okay, well, yeah, wow, we all feel something very powerful and strong, but how does that translate into how we communicate with our teams? And I know for myself, that was a product of a lot of discussion from a lot of different sources, right? Within our industry, with outside of our industry, and listening to our employees, how are they feeling? What are they going through? And I think that idea that we need to learn a little bit and be open to that education, and we may not get it right every time. I think, you try to be thoughtful, but at the same time, you want to learn from your experiences. But I think that's kind of where we are in the journey. And yes, I think the voice of our teams have never been more, powerful, but more important also in helping us guide and stay true, to what the values of our companies are.
I think all good points. I think one reason, right, where employees are expecting a little bit more is their trust for their workplace has increased, right? We've seen, and here's what I mean by that. We've seen across the board that trust in business has grown. An Axios poll found that 81% of consumers agreed that large companies like Campbell were vital to America's future. Our own polling shows that trust in consumer packaged goods companies increased 50%. For employees, according to an Edelman Trust barometer, they turn to their employer for valued information, much more so than the federal government or other media sources. So how do you, when it comes to maintaining that trust with your workforce, what are the important steps you have to take? How do you keep that bond and actually strengthen that bond going forward?
Yeah, it's interesting. I do think, one of perhaps again, an unintended consequence or benefit of a very difficult moment going through COVID is it created a demand on frequency and transparency that may not have always existed in kind of everyday business. And I think it tested companies in a variety of different ways. And actually, I think if done well, and certainly it would be evident that so many of my peers that are out there in other companies have just done an amazing job, navigating through this. But I think this gave us an opportunity to really, kind of put our money where our mouth is, and really live into the values, right? Is it really most important that you're taking care of the well-being of your employees? Is that evident in your actions, or are that just words you're saying? And I think there's probably never been a time in recent history where it's been more directly evident on whether you really are supporting. Oh, you believe in community, but are you really supporting it? Are you committing resources? And as that our supply is not fulfilling demand, are you still carving it out for the food banks? Are you still making the decisions that you need to make? And I think those are real proof points that have been occurring. And I think the other thing that we've realized as a company is that proximity and access to your leaders in a transparent, more vulnerable conversation goes a long way to build trust. And so what we've got to make sure we do is, when we come out of this crisis, and perhaps there's not quite as much of a demand for the, kind of immediate weekly check-ins that we do now, that we keep those learnings alive in how we're engaging, with our colleagues across the company, and that, that people feel that they know and understand where I'm coming from on stuff. And if we need to clarify decisions, we create the forum and the touch point for that happening, that doesn't get so wrapped up in kind of corporate speak and formality, but creates a level of authenticity that allows that trust to continue to be built. And so, I think this is a circumstance where we've been given an opportunity as an industry and as leaders and companies to be given a platform to demonstrate values and trust. Now we got to make sure that we don't forget how important that is when we get back to the kind of, welcomed but normal grind of our days.
What to flip that, good points. That's the employee. What does it mean for the consumer? The consumer now has more trust in the company, more trust in the industry. Do we have newfound obligations and responsibility to the consumer?
Yeah, look, I think again, I really do firmly believe that the role of companies and our ability to both improve our communities and our planet at the same time we're delivering results, continues to be elevated as an expectation. And again, I do see that in both our consumer engagement as well as our investor engagement. And again, I think this is great, right? I think if there's a path that's going to help us address some of the systemic issues that we have in society, we're going to be better at accomplishing those goals if corporations are a little bit off the sideline and on the field. And so I think the demand that's coming from consumers, now it also means the stakes are high, right? So, a misstep, you're not going to PR it away the way that sometimes perhaps occurred in the past. And I think that's good too. Drive the accountability and really be thoughtful in the decisions. And I think we, as companies, really have to get serious about it. When we say we're going to reduce waste, or we say we're going to embrace animal welfare, or that we're, going to make a commitment to a community, people are no longer just accepting the statements. They're going back and looking, are you doing what you said you're going to do? And if you're not, you're going to probably get called on it. And I think that's a great outcome. And I think, again, that's true, for our consumers, but also for our investors. And, we know that's the way we're really going to advance forward, this balance of responsibility, of consistently meeting shareholder needs and delivering on expectations while also improving, the world we're in, which, by the way, I don't think those two things are necessarily at all mutually exclusive.
Yeah, I'll paraphrase what you said. Results are the new commitments.
Yeah.
Perhaps industry writ large has gotten away for a long time saying what they'll do in the future. And now we're very much going to be judged by what we're doing in the present.
Yeah, no one's particularly interested in my 10-year goals on, environmental improvement. And I got it, right? I get that, right? It's pretty easy to say, well, you know what, in 10 years, we're going to do this, but, what are you going to do next year? What's the progress going to look like? How do we, and what's your reporting mechanism? Where can I go to see this? Where's your corporate responsibility? How about transparency on your representation of diversity in the company? Is that something you're publicizing or not? And I think, the one of the things that I've loved about Campbell's from the get-go, and what attracted me to this company, is, there's no other public companies that, are 150 plus years old, headquartered a mile from where we put the first tomato into a can, and still have a very large shareholder representation of the founding family. And I think that has come with it a real, kind of value system on support for the community that now is kind of being ramped up even further. And I think that's a great thing.
Well, so let me ask you, this will be my last question. We'll have a question or two we get to.
Yeah, sure.
So, massive upheaval in the marketplace, consumer, or your own workforce expecting more, consumers expecting more. To your point, you've got to do all of it in the now, not in the future. So how'd that work for you in a largely virtual environment? Your office workforce is still not full-time back in the office. Of course, the people who keep these facilities up and running have been there from day one and have been heroic in what they've done.
Absolutely.
But how the heck have we managed to increase the expectations in this new way of working, and how's that worked out?
Well, I do think, it's certainly on a continuum. I would say that, there's little doubt in my mind that getting us back into a collaborative environment where we're working as a team in closer proximity every day is still the goal, right? That's still the end game. But I do think the reality of virtual work and the ability to connect in different ways to ensure that when geography is a, necessity in what we're doing, that we can still connect and link up and align, is something that we really learned through this journey. And again, I think probably we were all a little bumpy in the beginning, and still very rare that I go through a day without the infamous "you're on mute." But I think at the end of the day, the idea that we've learned to find meaningful ways to connect in a virtual environment, I really expect all of us to have as part of our tool bag in the future. And I think it's served us well in a time where we've needed to be in touch with one another very frequently. And it's pretty easy, right, to just ping each other. I think, one of the challenges we've had in the company is, creating the boundaries to close the lid on the laptop, right? All of a sudden the workday bleeds into the evening, bleeds into the weekend. And if you're not careful, it's just kind of around the clock work, which, takes its toll on everyone. And so we've got to, we also have tried to really, be as disciplined as we can in saying, all right, pencils down, right? We're not doing email from this point forward. We're not going to do, more meetings after this point. We're going to try to, help people get a break in there as well. And I think that's been a skill that we've had to build a little bit along the way also. So I do think the future will hopefully look a lot more like it did in the past, but with some meaningful additions that we've picked up along the way this last year that will hopefully kind of give us a little bit of the best of both worlds.
Let me close with one question that came in here. You mentioned you've done some reflection over the last year on equity and social justice. And can you share specifically what some of that work and reflection has included, and what particularly was valuable to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think perhaps the biggest realization for me on my personal journey was evaluating the way that I approached these challenges or opportunities within the company and within prior companies. And and why don't I see more progress as I do in so many other parts of the business? And as I did that self-examination, I think what became clear to me is because we mobilize, resource, govern other initiatives in a very different way. And at the end of the day, I don't think this is any big aha moment to say that those things that you put that kind of commitment against, you have a better likelihood of accomplishing those goals, is going to be different than ones where a lot of good intentions and maybe some grand statements, but without the tangible commitments and conviction and plans. That was a big aha moment for me. I also think in the spirit of so many of the challenges that we've been through, I do think opening and widening my purview to seek out education and understanding from sources other than, kind of my traditional circle, whether that was some of the things that, I just accessed and began to digest, or people that I made a conscious effort to reach out to have a conversation that I might not have done in the past. And really not just touching base, but open to the learning and the understanding. And I think, those elements together of both understanding what it takes to make a difference, but also being better informed and educated, were a big part of my journey, over the last year. And by the way, I know this is not unique to me. I've talked to so many of the folks that are probably on this call, or that were out there navigating the same path that I was navigating, went through a lot of their own, I think, self-examination and assessment of what we could do better. And by the way, I'm anxious to hear what others are doing, because by no means do I think, that we've got the perfect blueprint. I think part of this is going to be about, learning, adjusting, and moving forward. But I do believe there's a different level in my mind of conviction and commitment now than certainly I've ever seen in the past.
Well, we'll try to create that forum for you to learn
Yeah,
from
it's great.
speakers and have some of that information. Thank you so much for today. Three things that really struck me. One, humility, and you talked about it with COVID. You talked about it with the social justice issues and inclusion and diversity. There's a degree of humility there that I think really stands out and is welcomed by your workforce. Two, your point about systemic change, right? If you want different results, you just got into it again, the change has to be embedded throughout the business. I think that's particularly helpful. And then you made a point when we were talking about what your workforce is looking for, and I think what people want in order to succeed, and that's proximity and access to leaders, which I think is important, right? It's what workforce is looking for now. It speaks to one of the values of being in the workplace together, to have that proximity, to have that access, and it's something that people benefit from. So I think all great insights today. Thank you for taking the time. I know the audience enjoyed it, and best of luck with the rest of 2021.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it.
I'll close and just let people know we have another session coming up April 27th. We're going to be joined by two CEOs at that time, Dylan Lissette, the CEO of Utz, and Mark Smucker, the CEO of JM Smucker Company. Both of those companies have been on acquisition tears in recent months. And I think they've been great insights to us in April. So we hope you'll join us then. Mark, big thank you to you and your team.
Yep, I'll look forward to tuning in. Those are two pretty good ones
to
watch. So we'll look forward to that too.
Take care. Have a great Tuesday.
Okay, see ya. Bye.